Hello again, Randy Stafford introducing our next speaker, Mr. Patrick Quinn. Pat Quinn is a former four-term mayor of Broomfield. He was first elected in 2007 and served three terms, leaving office in 2013. Then he was elected again in 2019 and served through May of 2021. Pat has lived in Broomfield since 1981, where he and his wife, Carlene, are the parents to five daughters, all of which attended or are attending Broomfield High School. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from Colorado State University. He remains an active certified public accountant, providing tax and contract chief financial services on a limited basis. For 22 years, Pat was the owner of Quinn Associates PC, a CPA firm in downtown Denver, which at the time when he sold the firm in 2010 had 10 employees. He has served as controller, chief financial officer, and a CPA to numerous companies over the years, large and small, and private and public. Pat has dedicated nearly 40 years to community service in Broomfield. His passion has always been Broomfield's open space program, having served on Broomfield's Open Space and Trails Committee for 8 years and on the Broomfield Open Space Foundation board for 12 years. Broomfield's successful open lands program now has over 8,000 acres of open lands and hundreds of miles of trails, partly as a result of Pat's involvement. And importantly for our presentation today, Pat Quinn was mayor of Broomfield when the city council voted unanimously to withdraw from the Jefferson Parkway Public Highway Authority. So please welcome Pat Quinn, who will be talking about Broomfield's actions with respect to Rocky Flats. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Randy mentioned, my name is Pat Quinn, and I have been asked to address local government involvement and actions that have taken at Rocky Flats. And Randy gave a lot of my background, but let me go ahead and just kind of summarize it. I was a certified public accountant. I am an active one. I had a firm that specialized in oil and gas, and that's significant because I'll talk about that in a second. For over 23 years. I was elected 4 times, as Randy said. The other thing I guess I want to add to my resume is that in 1964, my family moved to 92nd and Stewart Street. So from 64 to 73, I lived downwind from Rocky Flats and certainly was aware of Rocky Flats and the issues that were occurring out there, having relatives that worked at Rocky Flats. Let me start by the reason why I call my program or my presentation today "All Politics Are Local" is because all politics are local, and regardless of what the issue is, the mayor and the city council may have to address it. We are accessible at every level. Our phone numbers are published on the city's website. We have emails on the city's website. When we go to our grocery stores, our citizens or our constituents will address us and bring up issues, some of which, maybe city council issues, some of which may not. There are numerous opportunities to address city council, and going into oil and gas, I'll just say it this way, that the citizens take advantage of all those opportunities. The number one thing, after being, mayor for 7.5 years is that health, safety, and welfare of our residents is always the number one concern. I mean, that's why your local government, that's what you have to do. You need to make sure you take into consideration the health, safety, and welfare of all your residents. I'll point out that public safety or the police department is the largest budget line on Broomfield's budget. We don't have a fire department, or it would be up there as well. And concepts such as defunding the police is something that even a progressive city council like Broomfield has, it just doesn't hit our radar. And before I talk about Rocky Flats, I think it's important to talk about the analogy on oil and gas because we're a local government. We're meeting every Tuesday. We're making laws on traffic and and open space and development, but there's just certain issues that we don't have any authority on. We don't have primacy on. We may have some authority, but we don't have primacy. And I make the comment is that all politics are local, but local government does not have primacy on things, issues like oil and gas, for example. In Colorado, before SB 181, which was passed in 2017, it was very clear that the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment had primacy regarding regulations on oil and gas, and basically the local government had little or no say. We had to kind of carve out whatever regulations we wanted to put in, understanding that. I'm going to also point out to you that the oil and gas is dramatically different than plutonium at Rocky Flats, because when oil and gas comes to town, and this isn't an exact duplicate of the rig that came into town in 2019, but when that rig came into town, everybody knew it was going to come to town. We talked about it for a couple of years, and everybody, the assumption by and large is that having an oil rig, 1,300 feet from your home is not a good thing. And so that's the background. Broomfield, had a lot of testimony over the years on oil and gas. Most of it heated. We brought in regulations nobody else had brought in, for oil and gas, which were codified in SB 181. And so I'm just trying to say that we're a local government. In my case, because of my background, Rocky Flats has always been something I'm aware of, but it's not necessarily something other council members are or were or the public is. But Broomfield has a lot of ties to Rocky Flats. Many of our founders, Rocky Flats was created in the 50s. Development called Broomfield, or called Broomfield Heights, was developed. The development began in 1956, and so a lot of World War II veterans that worked at Rocky Flats wanted to have a home. That wasn't necessarily in Boulder, moved to Broomfield, and we incorporated in 1961. And it's also significant, I'll show you, that our water supply is from Great Western Reservoir. As I said earlier, we don't have primacy, over the cleanup in the Central Operating Unit, but that doesn't mean we don't have goals to want the health, safety, and welfare be considered when talking about the future of Rocky Flats. So let me give you some of the background. Broomfield, this is a map that Broomfield created when CDPHE and the DOE weren't willing to give us, or didn't have maps of the foundations and the contamination that exists on site. Broomfield is up here on the north and east. Our boundary goes up to Indiana. There's Great Western Reservoir I talked about, and in a minute I'll talk about Woman's Creek. And there were dams that got breached in 2011 that's an issue we addressed. But this is a schematic of all the foundations. And I presume at some point in time that you've already had a discussion of the fact that a lot of plutonium is contained at the site. They encased the foundations of a lot of the buildings that were super contaminated, and they're on site, and there's groundwater coming to and from the site. So this is a map Broomfield created, and I'll point out here, as other people have no doubt several times, it's in my conscious continuously that the half-life of plutonium is 24,000 years. So let's talk a little bit historically about what Broomfield has done. In the early 90s, and this is after the 1989 raid on Rocky Flats, and after Congress started acting on, creating a super fund and funding the restoration of Rocky Flats or the reclamation of Rocky Flats, whatever words you want to use. Tritium was found in our reservoir, the Great Western Reservoir I showed you. Our entire water supply was replaced for an approximate cost of $100 million. It's not a fact that I think that's hugely known out there, but I want to point out to it, it was through the city manager and the city council at that time that became proactive and got the federal government to act on that. Items that I was involved in 2011 when I was mayor, we became aware that the DOE was going to breach the dams at Woman Creek that I showed you earlier. And Broomfield was pretty adamant that if we wanted the water, any water coming from Rocky Flats to be tested, and that's something we protested at the time. And it's my understanding, in talking to others, that we were successful in that and are successful to this day, that the dams have not been breached. During that process, here's a picture, and I'm going to make a couple points on it, of the tour that we took. I had requested that we have a tour of Rocky Flats, and this is near the Central Operating Unit. Once again, you're probably familiar that there's two separate Central Operating Unit controlled by the DOE, and then a peripheral operating unit that I believe is now by Fish and Wildlife. But this was a tour you take. When you're out there, you don't know that the foundation's there. You don't know the plutonium is there. It's a windswept prairie, which is why maybe our public isn't too aware of it. So in Broomfield's case, what we have developed over the years is kind of a philosophy that we should develop our own testing protocol. And and so we have decided that how we're going to approach this is we're going to test. We're going to do standards that are that at the 5 picocuries level versus the 50 that were in the central operating units. And so we've taken the position in all future projects. It's not a formal policy, but it's been the active policy for a few years now with the city, county, Broomfield. And that leads us to talk about the Jefferson Parkway that Randy mentioned. Broomfield had asked specifically that there be testing done along the right-of-way, which is on Indiana, and actually the right-of-way was carved out of the refuge in the act that created the refuge and created the cleanup. And the goal was to have the beltway around Denver to be completed through that right-of-way. But when they did the testing of the Parkway site in 2019, it was found, a spike was found of over 200 picocuries. And from Broomfield's point of view, 2019 was a contested election because of oil and gas, and health and safety and welfare was on the minds of all of our city council. I just became mayor again because of all those issues. And the council voted unanimously to withdraw from the Parkway Authority. And so we did. It was abrupt. The current mayor is not able to speak on some of these issues right now because there's litigation going on. But we were, I guess, bold in pulling out to the Parkway. At least that's what Arvada and Jefferson County tell us. So we also, because of that, there's a project called the Rocky Mountain Greenway, which is connecting Rocky Mountain Arsenal with Two Ponds, which is another refuge site. And Rocky Flats, and we withdrew from the project to complete trails in that, without making too much comment. We just didn't want to participate in the project. I guess one other comment I want to make is that we on all future development, we do have developable sites out by Rocky Flats, out by Indiana and 128. And while I was mayor in 2020, the Watermark apartment project came to us. And at that point in time, we're talking about Greenway and the Jefferson Parkway. And so we came up with the informal policy, once again, of requiring testing. And in talking to staff this last week, as I prepared for this, Watermark, is going to go through with testing and determine whether there are, any issues. And our hope is that the protocol is in such a way that it'll assure the safety of the residents there in the future. I don't want to take a lot of time, on my presentation. What I do want to do is talk about some observations for me. I'm now retired, from everything in life except from some minor CPA projects. And so, you reflect back on things. And I look back to, once again, to 1964 when I moved downwind to Rocky Flats. The thing that strikes me in talking to residents of Broomfield, in Broomfield, would have had in 1968 a population of 6,500. It's got a population now of 75,000. It'll be at 120,000. If you talk to the 75,000 or polled them, I would guess that less than half know about Rocky Flats, and those that know about it wouldn't necessarily know of the known contamination that remains there. I mean, the graphic that I showed you on where the foundations are, I think would come as a surprise to most and of concern to most people, in Broomfield, and that plays a factor in the politics. Around here, because people, oil and gas came to town, it was controversial. Bringing up Rocky Flats, where it's this windswept prairie, is not something that many politicians are willing to do, but in Broomfield, we do, and we have. And so I guess my basic comment is the reason why Rocky Flats doesn't come up a lot is because people just don't know about it, don't know the extent of what occurred out there or what still exists out there. One of my thought processes has been, because you're not going to get the federal government to address the issue at this point in time. We've invited CDPHE a couple times up to Broomfield. It's not on their radar. They consider Rocky Flats to be closed and an issue that doesn't need to be addressed. So what I was proposing to do in the last 2 years of being mayor, or year and a half being mayor, was that some of the cities in the northern part of town, or Arvada and Westminster included, form a coalition on which we would address what I call here the elephant in the room, and talk about testing protocols that we would share, and maybe facilities, and try to make the cost affordable to everybody, and do some type of I guess agreed upon process. my last slide really just says what I said earlier, that elected officials, in other cities near to us, and I will talk about it, called me up after we withdrew from Jefferson Parkway and said, is there any new information you have other than the spike on the Parkway? And I would say, no, it's not. And they wouldn't want to change the subject because it just is not something other cities want to address. I do have to mention that Superior has been very, very active on this, and I'm going to close out by saying I'll address questions in whatever format, I can. I'm taping this in March, and on April 23rd, I'll make myself available for questions, but that's the end of my formal presentation.